We've talked about how dual citizenship can be used to build your options and to have a backup plan. It can increase your investment opportunities. It can even be a bridge to help you reduce your taxes with the right planning. But what about dual citizenship to protect yourself from an authoritarian government? With more Westerners concerned about the direction their country is going, I'm going to talk today about how dual citizenship can help you be prepared no matter what happens. Here's a headline for you. Are fears of authoritarianism in the US hyperbole? What would my German grandparents say? That's the headline of an article written by Diane Foreman on WBUR.org. This is Boston's national public radio station, and so you would argue the radio station is perhaps a little bit leaning to the left, maybe a lot leaning to the left, depending on who you're asking. But this is an interesting commentary that talks about dual citizenship and how, with so many Westerners, not just Americans, but Westerners in general, concerned about what's happening in their country. Bank accounts are being frozen. Governments are taking money from your bank account at the top, or they're rolling in laws that allow them to do such bail-ins. All kinds of anti-freedom measures are being rolled out. And oh, by the way, there's all kinds of new tax increases that politicians want to bring on the way. What would my German grandparents say? Interesting question. And so we're going to talk about that in why dual citizenship is so powerful to protect yourself from authoritarianism. My name is Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We are a boutique consultancy that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where they're treated best, which means reducing your taxes, diversifying and protecting your assets, and yes, having at least dual and possibly multiple citizenships to protect yourself from whatever is coming next in the world, because as much as we'd like the world to just go back to normal, it hasn't been normal for a long time, and hope is not an option. So we help people prepare for all of that. We also host the biggest and best offshore conference called Nomad Capitalist Live. I'm going to share the article with you, which says, over the past month, my social media feed has been filled with stories of people looking for ways to leave the United States. No doubt she is correct. You are seeing record numbers of Americans living in Mexico, going to Portugal, going all over the world. I'm seeing more people than ever in the countries that I go to. We've talked about Eastern Europe. I see people in Mexico. People come up to me all the time. They're telling me their plans of how, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that I'm able to watch you and others who talk about getting out, because it wasn't very long ago when you'd say, why would an American go to Mexico? And now, we've been talking about it for many years. Now it's happening. It is happening. Americans are the growth business. I've been telling you for a decade, protect yourself. Now it's finally coming to fruition. I understand there are growing fear and anxiety. Now, we're going to get into the article. I'm not here to impart my views on U.S. politics. I'm merely sharing her views, and you can agree, you can disagree, but I'm simply sharing what she's saying. So don't do this thing where it's like, he read an article, that means he believes it. Listen, Larry King interviewed serial killers. Doesn't mean Larry King's a serial killer, right? I'm just sharing the article. We live in a country where in some states women are forced to carry babies resulting from incest or rape, where children can be gunned down during their weekly spelling lessons, where gay marriage and contraception are suddenly up for debate, where gerrymandering and systemic voter suppression are increasing, and the worst effects of climate change are ever present, while federal action has been slow to come. Now, no doubt, if you are more on the right side of the aisle, you're saying, hey, maybe those things don't all matter to me. But here's what I can say as someone who comes from the United States and left, is that I felt politically homeless in the US because I certainly am much more libertarian. I'm very fiscally conservative, fiscally libertarian. I like just to be left alone. I don't want to intrude on anybody else. But you know what? I can see that there are things where the left side of the aisle in the United States has a better position on that. Now, no doubt there's this, since I've left the US, there's this giant change now where like the left wing is switched with the right wing and like I don't get involved in U.S. politics. That's what happened when I just left and gave them their passport back. I don't want to be involved. But what I can tell you is, whether you're on the left side, whether you're on the right side, I can promise you they are taking away your freedoms. They're making your life more difficult. And so whether you agree with her particular issues or not, it is getting worse. Clearly, our country has many fissures, some potentially irreparable. But I'm not ready to abandon the United States yet. I do wonder, however, whether I'll know if or when it's time, or if I'm in danger of missing the window to exit as my grandparents nearly did. Her German grandparents had the chance to exit. And if you look throughout history, how many people survived because they exited at the right time? What do I tell you? Better years too early than a day too late. If you can afford to get citizenship by investment, if you have the claim to citizenship by descent through your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, etc., if you're able to get a residence permit and commit some of your time every year to living in another country, even if it's a day, a week, or a month in some cases, if you're willing to do something, If maybe you've got a spouse who is from a country where you don't need to move to that country, but you can get citizenship without living there. If you can do any of those things, it is worth working towards a second passport, even if you're not that wealthy, because governments around the world are becoming authoritarian. There are some that you agree with more of what they're doing, or you don't agree with more of what they're doing, but authoritarianism is on the rise. And so what she's saying is her grandparents had a chance to get out. She's fortunate, she says, because contrary to most of the hand-wringers in my feeds, again, her words, I could leave the U.S. tomorrow if I so choose. I have dual citizenship in the United States and in Germany. As of 2 years ago, I can live freely in any country in the European Union because she holds a German passport. And so a lot of people don't realize this. If you're German, or if you're Irish, or if you're Austrian, or you're Portuguese, you can move to any of the countries in the European Union. You can also move to Switzerland and others that aren't in the EU but are in Europe. And so that gives you a lot of opportunities. The European Union, no doubt, has a lot of challenges. And I'm not going to tell you. I've put out episodes where I say, here's all my thoughts, good and bad, about the European Union. But the one thing it gives you is optionality. Now, you can get a Caribbean citizenship, and you'll have about half a dozen countries that you can move between with a little bit less, a little bit fewer privileges. But hey, Bulgaria and France are not the same. Estonia and Italy are not the same. And so if you have a European Union passport, Germany or any of the rest, that does give you optionality to where you don't have just one country to choose from. They're not all the same. They certainly have some of the EU regulations on top of them. And so, listen, what I would also argue is not only can she live in Europe, but she also has, if something happens to the U.S. or the U.S. annoys people, she can go and get a residence permit somewhere else as a German, which may be easier, or it may be even the only way to do it in certain cases where the U.S. has, cut off ties. Obviously, it doesn't happen that often, but certainly getting a residence permit as an American sometimes is a little bit more difficult. My siblings, our children, and I were approved for German citizenship after a lengthy application process. And yes, what many people don't understand is you've got to collect documents, you've got to wait. It might take years in some cases to get citizenship by descent. And so if you need a second passport right away because you're concerned about taxes, authoritarianism, or whatever else, maybe getting a citizenship by investment in 6 months and then waiting on the one that takes 1, 2, 3, 4 years may not be a bad idea. Now you got yourself a little passport portfolio. Now you've built your options even further. German federal law grants citizenship to descendants of individuals who are forcibly deprived of their nationality as a result of Nazi persecution. Hitler revoked my mother's citizenship during World War II. To accompany my nascent citizenship, I've been studying German for the last year or so on Duolingo, and my second passport and fledgling language skills are the insurance policy I'd hoped I never need. Now, the fact that you had family that lived in Germany, to me, I think for a lot of people, that helps, right? And so if you can claim a passport that has a family connection, you're going to maybe feel better about that. And maybe I wonder if that doesn't help some people take action sooner, right? If you feel like you have a connection to the place, you will be more likely to go there before the proverbial crap hits the fan, right? Whereas I think citizenship by investment in the Caribbean is a great part of a passport portfolio. I think most people look at that as a staging ground. Hey, if I can get to St. Lucia, then I can figure out my next move, right? Rather than I'm going to go and live in St. Lucia for the rest of my dying days. You can do that, and hey, a number of countries in the Caribbean have absolutely no taxes. They're probably going to leave you alone. But if you don't want to do that, at least it's a good first step. But I like the idea of learning the language, for example. So if you don't want to learn a language, get citizenship in a country that speaks English, like the Caribbean countries. But having some language skills, I would argue the next step is having a home. Now, in a country like Germany, if you live in the United States, not giving you tax advice, you're going to be fine. But if you start spending more time in Germany, you might be some things you have to consider with that on a financial level. But the next step, in my opinion, would be having a home there, or having a home somewhere else in Europe where you can go so that you're not held back by using your insurance policy that, as she says, she hopes she never needs. A lot of people think that. A lot of people hope they never use their insurance policy against the US, against Australia, against Canada, but they're increasingly realizing, I need one, because who knows what could happen. But if you have a home, that could be another helpful thing to move things along. Anyway, she continues, I think of my relatives and refugees worldwide who have been forced to flee their countries because of war, oppression, and persecution, mothers and children walking from Guatemala to the US border for safety. By the way, I really feel for those people, and you could make certainly a case that a lot of the actions, a lot of the policies of the U.S. government has created the problems in places like Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, etc. Them coming to the United States is not an indication that it's still perfect in some great shining city in the hill. It means it's the nearest place where they can make some money. And despite the fact that the U.S. is the 59th least safe country, of almost 200 in the world, hey, there's pockets where they can go and they can be safe. So don't mistake people coming to the United States on an economic level with you and your $1 million a year business saying, well, this is still the best for me. Not the same. And so she goes on about that. The world is full of refugees who've had no choice but to leave their homelands because the alternative is potential death. My mother and grandparents were refugees. They fled Nazi Germany in June of 1939. I have the same story in my family with my adopted grandfather, my grandmother's second husband, who fought in and then escaped during the war. Although all of our German ancestors were Jewish, my grandparents had converted to Christianity. They were married in a church in 1931. Their predominant source of identity was proud Germans, and they were integrated well into Berlin society. My grandfather Otto naively believed they were safe against the rising anti-Semitism of the 1930s because my grandparents and their daughters were all baptized. I think too many people think little things that maybe won't matter when the time comes are going to save them. Otto was optimistic through Germany's initial prosperity under Hitler, but the subsequent power shifts with the Third Reich were swift and devastating. What I always say, it's like bankruptcy. It's going to happen slowly and then all at once. If you're not prepared, I think there are literally cases where on a financial level and on a personal freedom and a safety level, there's going to be times where even the fastest passport, collecting your documents, filing, waiting for a citizenship by investment, 5-6 months. You may not have 5 or 6 months, or something may happen to where they're not accepting applications. Look at what happened during the recent Russia-Ukraine war. They came down swiftly, and some of the countries even came down swiftly on Ukrainians and said, no, we can't do due diligence on you. Effective immediately, we don't want you. Sorry, you don't have an option. You're not allowed. Immediately. So there have been times when tax changes come, and you've got 1 or 2 weeks to prepare, or a month to prepare. You can't get second citizenship. And so whether it's taxes, freedom, safety, authoritarianism, again, better years too early than a day too late. If you believe that bad things are happening in your country, or could, figure out some percentage of your net worth, some percentage of your income, put that at getting a residence permit that leads to citizenship, or even better, just getting the citizenship directly through any of the methods that I mentioned. Because Otto was naively optimistic. And yet he continued to be stubbornly optimistic, even as their beloved black, white, and red flag was replaced by the swastika and stormtroopers in the streets. His family remained in Berlin after the Nuremberg laws were enacted, which stripped their rights as German citizens, invalidated their baptisms, and gave them new middle names. Eventually, Otto lost his family business, the right to have his daughters attend their school, and most of his money. My grandparents stayed in their country through all of it because Germany was their home, as it had been for generations of my ancestors. They refused to leave when they could have done so safely because of their deep love for their country. And so the article goes on. You can find this at WBUR.org. She says that it feels like the United States is rapidly changing. Now, you may agree with the reasons why, or you may have your own reasons why, but I can tell you people on all sides of the aisle, not just in the U.S., but other countries, are concerned. Americans, Canadians, Australians, Germans, Dutch, New Zealanders, and others are concerned. I would argue more concerned than the Mexicans that come to us, the Egyptians that come to us, the places where you think, oh, surely we're better than them. I don't think they think that way. You think that every Egyptian who has money wants to leave? I was just talking to my Egyptian friend yesterday. She said, yeah, maybe for vanity. They want to go to Canada, spend their 3 solid years, get citizenship, and then go somewhere else. Go back home, perhaps, and tell everybody, look, I'm Canadian now. That doesn't really mean that they love Canada or hate Egypt. It means they're looking for a way to diversify. And hey, if you're Egyptian, being Canadian is diversification. If you're American, it's not. You need some way to diversify, because how many times have we heard throughout history this story where people said, this is my home, I'm going to fight to the death? How many people comment over all the years we've been here on this channel saying, you should fight, you're a traitor, you should be ashamed of yourself, you don't have any testosterone because you're not going to stay and lose your entire fortune, have your children's baptism revoked. I don't have children, but have their baptism revoked, basically be shunned in society. Could the same thing happen again? I don't see why it couldn't. I'm not predicting that it will, but something certainly could happen. Will you be prepared? Protecting your fortune, by the way, protecting your ability to take care of your family, protecting your ability to feed your family and to continue a legacy throughout future generations is not something that a traitor does. It's something that you have a responsibility to yourself and those around you first. Put your mask on first, then help others around you, as they say when you fly. The idea that you have to somehow prioritize some odd form of patriotism, as if you're staying there and letting your money be taken from you or be lost in a currency crisis or whatever happens to it, how is that going to help everybody else? I guess you can stand and wave your tattered flag. They may have replaced that, as she says, what happened in Germany. But you can stand and wave your flag and claim you're a great patriot, and you can thump your chest and imagine how great your life is now that you're newly poor. I, for one, would like to be insured against that because I believe that taking care of myself and my family and being able to do good in the world is more important than having allegiance to a flag of a country I just so happen to be born in. You could do the same. You can get a residence permit somewhere else. You can get citizenship somewhere else so that when time comes, you have a place to go. Citizenship is the strongest because unless you're going to Australia, where they didn't let their own citizens in, you're going to be let in as a citizen. Residence, as we saw in the pandemic, most cases were let in, but there were some cases where there were exceptions or exclusions. So if you can get citizenship, that's going to be the best, where you've got another country where they've got to take you in. If you can get citizenship in Europe, where you've got access to all those countries, great. The Eastern Caribbean with citizenship by investment, you've got access to half a dozen. There are other examples. And even if you only get access to one, that's at least one in addition to the one that you have, because you never know what will happen. If you're an American and you can claim Canadian citizenship because your parent was born there, by all means do it. But don't think of that as some great diversification. It's a good step. I've also said in my Great American Plan B, if you're living in the United States, you can get Mexican residence to where it's right next door. That could be helpful. But that's not going to be a citizenship you can use right away. And listen, you're already seeing Mexico ask a lot more questions of folks coming on things like tourist visas. And so that's a good thing to have. It's very affordable. You can get residence permit in Mexico merely by showing your income. But that may not be the end-all, be-all unless you actually get the citizenship at some point, which does require you to spend some time living there. Find ways. Check our channel. Check nomadcapitalist.com. Reach out to us to get a second citizenship and figure out what you're willing to commit to not have the same story this woman's parents and grandparents went through. Is the fear of authoritarianism in the West hyperbole? I don't want to find out the hard way.